Join us now on Flickr at flickr.com/groups/art-of-photography.
Hey everybody, welcome back once again to yet another episode of The Art of Photography. My name is Ted Forbes, and today we're going to be looking at a history of image making. Okay everybody, I have developed a little presentation here today, and we're going to talk about a history of image making. Now, what I mean by this is there's a few photographers I'm going to talk about, but I want to talk about photography just from a technical perspective and the development and how it's become what it is today. And I'm actually going to go back further than the first, examples of photography, and we're going to talk about, lenses and some developments there. But this is going to be a history of image making. It's not drawing, it's not cave art, things like that, so I'm not going quite that far back. But more or less, photography as we know it has existed for about 160 years, and we're going to get into that in the 1800s here in a second. We're actually going to look further back. But just to put this into perspective, okay, so if you have 160 years of formal photography here, the planet Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. So if you do the math here, this basically leaves us with photography. It takes up about 1/281,250th of the history of our planet. Okay, so it's very young. Now, this is really not a fair thing to say because, could you expect dinosaurs to come up with photography? And humans have not walked the earth that long. But scientists kind of believe that humans have been around for about 160,000 years. And so even if you take that in perspective, photography takes up about 1/1000th of the history of human existence. So my point here is just to stress that photography is an extremely young medium, okay? And it hadn't been around that long. And what I want you to take from this is it's exciting to see where we're going to progress in the future with all this stuff, just to put things into a big perspective. This is the timeline I've made, and don't worry if you can't read it. I'm going to blow parts of this up. But we're going to look at about 3,000 years of photography here, and some things that led up to what we know as photography. You can see that most of the activity is over on the right-hand side, which has happened since the 1800s. But what we're going to do is start off, we're going to go back to about 1000 BC, and I don't remember exactly when this was discovered, but there was the discovery of what we call the Nimrod Lens, which dates back to 1000 BC. The Nimrod Lens sits in the British Museum in London, so you're welcome to go there and visit and see it. And it's debated of what the Nimrod lens was used for. It's a very crude-looking object, but more or less they think that it was probably used for making fire. Now, this is not cavemen, but this is, it's an early finding which, more or less is using glass to manipulate light. Okay, so if you're making a fire, that's what you're doing. It's kind of like when you used to use a magnifying glass when you were a kid to, burn paper or ants or whatever. Same concept. We'll go up to about 400 BC, and you have Modi, I believe is how you say his name, and this is not Cool Modi. This is Modi, the Chinese philosopher, who more or less describes what is a pinhole camera. And this couples with another event in Greece where you have Aristotle in 340 BC realizing the principle of the camera obscura with a pinhole. Now, if you go back to the very first episode of this podcast, The Art of Photography, I actually built a pinhole, a camera obscura, and we talk about how it works. And more or less what you're using is a pinhole rather than a lens to narrow the light and focus it. And this projects an image onto a surface. Now, we don't have any way of capturing that image off that surface yet. We definitely don't have digital CCDs, but we also don't have silver nitrate developed yet. But these early pinhole cameras were probably most likely used in drawing. And you can see in this little example, it's kind of probably hard to see, but at the bottom there's a little person looking into the pinhole with a curtain behind their head to block out light. And the one on the top right, it's real easy to see too, has a bench installed and a little desk, and the pinhole is up at the top, and the camera obscura projects light down onto the paper. So you could probably use it for drawing. In fact, there's a lot of controversy around this, but there's an argument that Renaissance portrait artists used pinholes, and mainly we knew the technology existed, but to develop the likeness, and these guys made their careers off of it, and also the huge jump in the quality of drawing skills, in a very short amount of time to what they became. So there's some speculation that possibly some of those guys were using pinhole camera obscura devices to draw subjects. Anyway, you can see that after 340 BC, not a whole heck of a lot happens that's related to photography. And we're going to go all the way up to 1000 AD, and in 1000 AD, a guy named Alzon writes a treatise called the Book of Optics. And what this is it's the first written account of a magnifying device. So what we're talking about here is not even a microscope at this point. It's really more of a magnifying glass. So, take that for what it is. In 1200, you have the discovery of silver nitrate. Okay, so this is basically what's still used in black and white photography today when you either shoot on a negative or make a print on a sheet of paper. It uses silver, which is light sensitive, in the silver nitrate solution. So basically, the brighter areas in the photograph, sensitize more particles of silver, and that's how you develop your photograph. In an overall sense. In 1280, we have the invention of spectacles, and this is approximate. In fact, it's not really sure where they came from. Most people think that it's probably in Italy. But again, this is significant because you're manipulating glass now to correct vision impairments, and so you're actually focusing light at this point using glass. So this is all leading up to photography. And then come 1826, we have the first photograph, which was taken that summer by a gentleman, a scientist named Nicephore Niepce, and I may have mispronounced that, but more or less, I'm going to show you this photograph here. This is it. He took this out his studio window, and it's just the rooftop, and you can see that the rooftop's kind of in the center, and there's a building on the left and another one on the right, and this is considered the first photograph, and we know how he did it. He more or less did this exposure. This is an 8-hour exposure, incidentally, but it was he used a metallic. It was a polished pewter plate, okay, and it was coated with a chemical called bitumen of Judea, which is an asphalt derivative of petroleum. And basically, he uncapped the lens and let this roll for about 8 hours. This was a long exposure, and then the chemical was then washed in a mixture of oil of lavender and white petroleum. So more or less, this dissolved away the bitumen, and it acted more or less like what we use silver nitrate for now. So this really started leading to a formalized process of photography. In 1832, you have Hercules Florence creates a process known as photography. This was a formalized, and it's photography with an IE. It was a formalized thing. It was given a name, more or less. In 1839, you have several things. You have John Herschel makes the first glass plate negative, and this is how things were done before film came along. Okay, so you basically would hand coat the glass, and but glass was significant because you can project light through the glass, and in turn you can make prints from this negative. John Herschel also goes on to develop the cyanotype process, which we'll talk about later. They're distinctive. It's a printing process. You would use a contact. There's no enlarger or anything, and it's more or less a blue and white process, which is really interesting. And also significantly, he came up with a way to fix pictures and make them permanent. Even with modern photography, if you're using film, if you use the chemicals to develop your emulsion and get your image, you can stop the development, but there's no way of fixing it to make it permanent. Eventually will wear away, and so he came up with the first process of doing that. 1840 was pretty significant. You have a British photographer, Fox Talbot, who invents the calotype process, or more or less formalizes it. And Talbot, I'll probably do an entire podcast on him. He was a bit of a rock star and is kind of considered one of the first big photographers, and a lot of times is considered the first, even though he didn't take the actual first photo. But developed this process in England, and kind of his drive for doing this, he was obviously a big science guy, but he had very poor drawing skills, and he wanted to find a way to reproduce images where he didn't have to draw them. And this is one of his early images. This is just a simple landscape of a tree. But I absolutely think the world of Talbot, and I think this is brilliant. You imagine a guy with bad drawing skills, and nothing called photography even really exists that formally at this point, certainly not widely known, and you're able to create this image. I mean, this is just amazing, the amount of detail. And this is early stuff, mind you, and these are scientists that are going about it at this point, but it's extremely interesting. In 1851, excuse me, in 1851, Frederick Scott Archer publishes his findings on a wet plate collodion process. And wet plate collodion, turns out, it becomes the most widely used process until the late 1880s when dry plate was introduced. But you have... I took a class fairly recently, which kind of inspired me to kind of dive into the history of all this stuff and share it with you guys. But colliding is very interesting. Basically, it's a process of taking a glass plate or a piece of tin, and you more or less coat your emulsion on the top. You go take your photo and you develop it. It all has to be done very quickly. It cannot dry or it doesn't work. And so part of the problem here, and I've got this funky photo here. This is this is a Roger Fenton photo. This is his assistant sitting in on the photographic van, it says on the side. And this was a wet plate photo. And because the plates can't dry, they have to be poured shot and processed all in the field, so to speak. And so this was about as portable as a camera got during Fenton's time. And literally this van is darkroom, and it's filled with chemicals and water for rinse and stuff. And they would literally take the image and go process it right there, and fix it in the whole thing. So you can see that the technology is pretty crude at this point, and not the most convenient in the world. In 1884, George Eastman develops film as a technology, which will replace plates more or less, and this is film as we know it today. George Eastman was a very interesting character, and obviously went on to found Kodak, and probably had more impact on photography than anyone in history, just in terms of bringing it to the masses and making it something that was a consumer activity all of a sudden. So what we're going to do here is bump up to the 20th century here. In 1908, Gabriel Lippmann wins a Nobel Prize in physics for his method of reproducing color based on a phenomenon of interference. Now, there were several methods of making color photographs. Everything was kind of either black and white or actually technically sepia or brown and white at this point. And there were several, but this one is fairly significant because it was an early one. Then Kodak obviously came up with several different processes, and there are multiple processes of slide film and negative film and all that today. Ilford had some early color stuff too, but more or less this one is the only one I'll mention in significance. In 1932, Dr. Edwin Land creates a process for instant photos, and Polaroid is born as we know it. Polaroid is actually the name of a type of synthetic plastic sheet used to polarize light. And another thing, Dr. Land was working on is, polarizing filters like you might use on a camera today if you're using a circular polarizer. So he developed a lot of those things and put them into commercial usage. But more importantly, in 1932, you have the Polaroid created. Now, Polaroid is pretty much gone now. There is a company that's still developing Polaroid, and we'll do a podcast on a lot of that stuff in the future. But this was kind of the consumer thing before digital came along. In 1981, Sony unveils the Mavica. And this is very significant because this is the first digital camera. It's a camera with a charge-coupled device used in imaging. And images are saved to a disk, but they're displayed on a television. So it's not a real camera at this point. It's more of a TV thing. In fact, it's interesting because, Mavica was the name of their digital camera model line for a long time. And Mavica is a condensed, it's abbreviation for magnetic video camera. And it was used in making stills. And it wasn't until 1990, and now we're getting into digital photography now, where in 1990 Kodak presents the DCS 100. And this is fairly interesting too. Compared by today's standards, if you think of, at the time of recording this, you could get a Canon 5D, which is not even really top of the line, but it's very high resolution. It's 21 megapixels, and it sells for about $2,500, give or take, depending on where you try to find it. But Kodak put out this DCS 100. It was a 1.3 megapixel camera, and the starting price on it was $20,000. Mainly only sold to select professionals who really wanted to get into this. It sold about 987 units total. The problem with something like this is at $20,000, only professionals are going to be the ones who want to use it, and at 1.3 megapixels, it's not high resolution enough for serious work. So anyway, I think it's fairly interesting and significant because you look at 1990, that was 20 years ago at the time I'm recording this, and look at all that's happened in the last 20 years as far as digital imaging. It's pretty interesting because if you look at the entire scope of what we've talked about today, not only has everything been condensed to the last 160 years, but the rate of innovation is rapidly rising, and things are coming out better and faster all the time. So I guess my point is it's going to be very interesting to see where this leads us. However, I also want to add that all of that progress is mainly on the capture device. That's mostly what we've been talking about. All the lens stuff was pretty early. This is also interesting if you go to the store today and you're looking at consumer inexpensive cameras, so like point and shoots in the $200 to $500 range at the highest. They'll use things like genuine Leica lens or Carl Zeiss is my favorite. They'll put a Carl Zeiss Tesser in there because it sounds really cool. Well, Carl Zeiss lived in the 19th century, and he was a optics designer. They did a lot of work with he had a company that did microscopes and medical lenses. They later went into photography and photographic lenses, and the Zeiss Tesser dates back to the 50s. So it's not current technology at all, but it's interesting how companies will use that as a selling point. Oh, and I forgot one last thing here, that in 2008, the very significant event of Forbes launches the Art of Photography podcast, and I'm actually kidding. That's not very significant in the grand scheme of things. I just thought I'd put it in there. But more or less, that's what we're looking at. Here's the entire scope of what we've discussed today. Like I said, this is going to be a work in progress. I'm going to add to this, maybe change the design around a little bit differently, and we'll talk about photographers and being the art of photography. I don't want to talk about the technical side all the time, but I thought that'd be fairly interesting to just kind of put together and talk about today. Anyway, I just want to put this into perspective and give everybody kind of a historical overview of stuff, and we'll do some more of this in the future. I'm not done with it yet. So anyway, once again, this has been The Art of Photography, and thanks for watching.